Welcome in. It is Big Ten Today. It is great to have you with us on this Monday. We're presented by Gatorade, the Monday Schmooze. Dave Revson, Nicole Auerbach, and Howard Griffith had the game this weekend that we had all been looking forward to all year. Similar result to the last couple of years. I'd say it had a different feel to it. Certainly was more competitive, far more competitive than last year was down the stretch, and probably more so than 2 years ago as well. But in the end, it is Michigan that is celebrating once again.
3 straight. Almost can't believe it. It didn't feel like these teams were ever going to go through a stretch like this after the way that Ohio State was dominating this rivalry. But 3 in a row, and man, it was a statement.
It was a statement, and they've done it differently. You mentioned the 3 in a row, and it's been done different ways. Different styles of offense have really been able to really lead them. But it's really puzzling if you're an Ohio State fan to why they can't get over the hump with all the talent that roster has.
We're diving into both sides of the equation here. That game is our big story. The Wolverines won it 30-24. Their 3rd straight victory, as we said, over Ohio State. First time they pulled that off in more than 25 years. Michigan never trailed in the game, though the Bucks did tie it late in the 3rd quarter, had a potential game-winning drive snuffed out in Wolverines territory when Rod Moore picked off Kyle McCord. Michigan headed to the Big Ten title game for the 3rd straight year. They had never gone prior to then. So let's start with Michigan. And, no Jim Harbaugh. That was the huge storyline that we have been following heading into this game. And it seemed like kind of no Harbaugh, no problem. I mean, Sharon Moore called an incredible game. And it really felt like in this game, Michigan was the aggressor. That was kind of the message that was said in play calls, 3 for 3 on 4th down, some trick plays. I mean, it just felt like they were the ones that were taking the fight to Ohio State.
It was remarkable when you think about someone doing this, having not been a head coach, this is his 4th game that he was on the sidelines and the game was up to him. From the beginning, he was aggressive. And yeah, those are short 4th down situations, but they went for all 3 in the first half. He puts in a backup quarterback to get the quarterback run game going. He calls a trick play where his running back's throwing a halfback pass. I mean, that was incredible. It was going for the win. It was leaving it all out there on the field. I don't know if I would have had the guts to do all of that as the acting head coach, but it was definitely different when you compared it to what was happening on the other sideline. Punting at midfield and some of the decisions trying to set up a 52-yard field goal and milk the clock there. He was playing to win the game, and it was remarkable.
As we were going and watching this game, I was kind of saying, okay, well, you're +1 in the decision making here.
Yes, you were keeping a running tally in the green room.
Yeah, it was like +5 to -2. When you start to look at some of the decisions. But I think what's really remarkable is, remember, he's still the offensive line coach, right? And
which everyone says is the hardest position to coach. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely, because you've got 5, and you also have a tight end every now and then.
Yeah.
Yes, you got a tight end coach, but you're seeing the game up front, right? That's where the focus is. So a lot of times you'll see the title as run game coordinator attached to, and it's a coach situation. But rarely do you ever see in college athletics where the offensive coordinator is also your offensive line coach. And oh, by the way, in the 2 biggest games that Michigan had, he's been the head coach as well. To be able to handle all of the things that he had to handle in this game was remarkable, and to be as aggressive as he was in this game. He wasn't shy about what he wanted to do and where he wanted this team to go.
And then, they have that 7-minute drive at the end of the game where it's the physicality. It is the offensive line. It's the run game. That's the way we've seen Michigan win this game in the last couple of years, especially 2 years ago. So it had a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
That was what was really fascinating to me. It wasn't the big plays this year, right? It wasn't the gash plays. It was hey, we're just going to grind it out and figure out a way to get down there and get the points we need. And I think the telling stat is the last 3 second halves of this game, last 3 years, Michigan's punted 1 time. Punted 1 time. Yeah. So there are different ways to get it done. You can get it done with the 75-yard Donovan Edwards touchdown runs like a year ago, or you can grind it out, get a touchdown, get a field goal when you need it. But the net result is the same, that when Michigan needs an offensive result, they have gotten it in the second half of these matches.
And you can probably make the case that it's probably a harder game to call when you have to be methodical moving the ball down the field than it is when you get the big chunk plays and you put a team away emotionally, because now all of a sudden the other sideline, they have to figure out how to address it. In this way, I mean, there was play after play that their players were coming up with. There was an ill-advised pass that JJ threw across his body, came up with the pass. And he was slinging that ball. It was coming out of there, and guys were making catches and making the plays that needed to be made out there.
You know, I think it also, as we're talking about kind of the way they responded to the ebbs and flows of the game, Zach Zinter's injury to score a touchdown on the very next play was incredible, and it was just a statement of the resiliency. His team's been through a lot, and they have responded each time, and I thought there was nothing better than that example there, because that could have changed the game in the other direction, and then all of a sudden Michigan had all the momentum.
Yeah, no doubt, and certainly wish him the best. Felt like it was a fairly gruesome injury. I know he did tweet out yesterday he'd already gone through the surgery, but the guy had a really, really good year, and it's always heartbreaking to see injuries like that in that situation. All right, so what does it all mean for Ohio State, Howard? So 39-3 is Ryan Day's record against Big Ten teams, and yet all three of the losses are to Michigan. Look, it's a fabulous program. He is an incredible coach. This one felt different. It was certainly a far more competitive game.
Yeah.
I think they achieved some of the stuff they set out to achieve. I mean, they improved their defense over where it was a year ago. But look, this is Ohio State. The expectation is to beat Michigan, or certainly not to lose 3 in a row to Michigan. So kind of what now here for the Buckeyes?
And I think part of it, before you get to the what now, I think part of it is also examining when they went on a run. What was it, 8 plays? I mean, they were physical at the point of attack.
Yes, they had that one drive where they tied it up. Yeah.
And it was like, whoa, wait a minute. Is this what we were expecting? Because this team, all we talked about was just how much better this team was getting, where the offensive line, and they went out and really were controlling and dominant up front, and Michigan responded. And it's just, and we talked about just how Coach Moore was calling the game, and then you look at the other side, that's the way you would have expected Ryan Day to be able to call the game, right? Because that's where you thought the experience was. He's been in this position before, he knows. But it just didn't happen. And when you look at the roster of talent that this program has had, it's kind of mind-boggling. And it's a tough situation to be in, because we all know he's a fabulous coach. But we also know how important beating Michigan is to that program.
Yeah, so there were, again, mentioned it about some of those conservative play calls early in the game. But also, you know, Kyle McCord, that first interception also, I think, really changed the way that both teams felt in the moment, but also maybe confidence in the way that the game was going to be played the rest of the way, and then obviously at the end too. So those were difference makers. When you talk about the talent on the roster, we've said all season, you know, is Kyle McCord a good enough quarterback to take this team to where it wanted to be? And we've seen him get better and better throughout the season, but in the biggest moments, he threw 2 picks.
Yeah, agreed. And it's hard to say that because he has had a really nice year, but I think it's a fair assessment. And we've asked that question during the course of the year. He'd only thrown 4 interceptions all year, and he comes out and throws 2. And I would agree with you. The last one, look, you're just trying to make a play.
First one.
But that first one, I mean, it obviously gave Michigan incredible field position, but it also just kind of symbolically, I mean, it's a really bad pass. And so it just kind of, it shakes you a little bit to your core. And the difference was pretty obvious with the quarterbacks. I mean, J.J. McCarthy had the one touchdown pass to Roman Wilson.
Don't know how he did that.
That was unbelievable. Aside from that, he did what you needed him to do. He was very accurate. He didn't make any mistakes. I mean, you mentioned this, maybe one ill-advised pass. Didn't have to pay for it. But the difference in the quarterbacks, I think, was pretty stark in this game.
Confidence, experience, just understanding. And JJ's won a lot of different games in a lot of different ways, which I think also showed, because we've talked about it. Okay, like, well, they run the ball so much. You know, can he win a game with his arm? Or, okay, they've been really pass heavy. Can they win the game with the run if they need to? They did both of those in different moments here.
And I think the other side of this is JJ really doesn't care about what the stats ultimately are.
We have learned that in these last few weeks, haven't we?
He didn't care. He didn't care. They just want to win games. And whatever they need to do to be able to win is what happens. And they have so many guys that step up for them and play and make plays that, you know, this team is just where they need to be.
And I think, too, the flip side of the interceptions, especially the first one, is, like, we've seen Michigan's defense do this all season. They get takeaways, and they change the game. They put their offense in a good position that way, too. And so I think that was also fitting as the defense started to gain confidence and get rolling in the game, too.
I do want to ask that kind of what now question with Ohio State. I'm interested in your take on this. Again, like, the world's going to change a little bit here, actually a lot of bit. We're going to have the 12-team playoff. And so this game, and we talked a lot in the build-up, this was kind of the last one of these, presumably, where it has a winner-take-all feel to it. That if you lose the game, now Ohio State could still thread the needle maybe and make the CFP. I think it's going to be far harder than it was a year ago. They need a lot of things to work out for them in order to get in. But the fact of the matter is, even if you do get in, the expectation is that you don't lose 3 in a row of these. So what you talk about the talent, it certainly isn't recruiting. Unless you're, and I don't think you're misidentified. You can say, well, maybe you win the recruiting battles, but the truth of the matter is the guys don't turn out to be as good as you think they are. I mean, most of these guys have been as good as you think, as the recruiting rankings would indicate. So what is it? Like, what's the missing piece here? What can they do differently?
I would probably say it ultimately comes back to recruiting. And where maybe they're not as dominant as they have been in other areas is in the offensive line. The interior offensive line has probably been an issue for them. And when you look at it, yes, they got better, but when you think about the way this team played under Urban, when you think about the way they played under Tressel, they could control the line of scrimmage. That wasn't going to be an issue. They had those guys up front. And listen, they lost some talented guys last year, and I guess it ultimately comes down to that. So they have to continue to get better in developing and recruiting those particular players. But what hurts is sometimes you miss. I mean, that's recruiting. That's part of it, is sometimes you miss and guys don't develop as fast as they need to. But I tell you what, this is a team, right, because we go back and talk about losing a different way. People talked about just how physical this team. Were they physical? Could they be dominant? And to me, yes, they addressed that question, but they still couldn't beat Michigan. And I think that's the problem, because they've lost to Michigan in a couple of different ways now.
Yeah, and I think, too, when you look on the defensive side of the ball, you can always get better in all of the levels. But we've seen individual players, JT, Hall, these guys, have those games. But the Chase Young type season where you're like a Heisman contender, those types of game wreckers, they haven't had. And those guys wreaked havoc in this game against Michigan. But really, it's just an uncomfortable situation. It's like when Jim Harbaugh was losing this game every year, because you could have big wins in the regular season. You could beat other rivals. Didn't matter. It would all get wiped away at the end of the year. And you feel that for Ohio State. Like, it's going to be a very uncomfortable offseason.
And these things are really cyclical, and I'm glad you bring up Harbaugh, because Harbaugh, as we all know, was 0-5 in this game and almost certainly would have been 0-6 in this game had they played in 2020, and now the narrative has completely shifted. So I don't think it's unreasonable to think it could shift back in the other direction, particularly given how well-built Ohio State is, how great the infrastructure is. But, yeah, you're right. I mean, they're going to spend now the next, whatever it is, 363 days
trying to figure out what it is.
Thinking about this, thinking about this over and over and over again.
And it's not glaring. Before it was glaring what needs to happen and what needs to change.
Right.
I don't know that they can just put their
But I
finger
think you
on
need
it.
to call a game differently, too. You need to call it, be aggressive, go for the win.
Again, no doubt who the aggressor was.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Our big stat is brought to you by Gatorade. Iowa's 13-10 win over Nebraska Friday marked the 4th victory for the Hawks this season, when scoring 15 or fewer points. That is the most for any Big Ten team this century. It's also the most for any team in college football this century. In fact, going back to 1991, last time that anyone has done it. This is what they do, Howard, and man, they do it well.
They're really good at it, right? They understand who they are. They go out and they play for one another, and they figure it out. They keep games close. And if they're close, you better believe they have an opportunity to win it, whether it's coming up with a field goal at the end or interception at the end, and just to be able to continue to make plays. I
mean, an incredible story of how they kick the field goal, who kicks it, hasn't kicked in a year. It just feels like they can make that one big play, the one play that a game is decided on. We've seen it with a long run or a pick six, but it always happens for Iowa, and they believe that. And we talk about complementary football every time we talk about Iowa, but their defense and their special teams, most of the time, they did have a couple block kicks.
That's what was so crazy, right?
Yeah.
Is that 1/3 of that equation
wasn't what we usually see from it.
No, it was bad. Their special teams were bad.
But then
until,
at the end.
Until they weren't.
Until they weren't.
But again, that usually keeps them in the game, right? Those 2 phases. And
Right.
this time, 1 phase mostly kept them in the game.
Yeah. No, it's incredible. I mean, they just absolutely know who they are. I keep coming back to 11 offensive touchdowns in 9 conference games, and you go 7-2. I mean, it almost seems impossible.
The margin for error is very small, but they tend not to need it. And this is also remarkable. We've talked a lot about this all season. The amount of injuries they've had on the offensive side of the ball too, for them to get to Indy and to play for a Big Ten title, really incredible.
And I think they'll tell you, the players that have had to step up, it wasn't like they just immediately took off. Deacon Hill did not become all of a sudden a great passer. This was a work in progress and needed to continue to be a work in progress, but he's been able to make the plays that were needed to be made. And it's, speaks. I'm just thoroughly impressed with just the mental makeup of this team and the way they're able to move forward. Because I don't know that if I was on a team like that where one side of the ball was not doing what they needed to do on a regular basis, that I would have the patience that these guys have. And it is really a remarkable story about how a coach can develop a team and that team can just continue to move like they understand and not worry about the outside noise.
They believe in what they do. And man, do they do it well. Again, more on the championship game coming up later in the show. Let's talk about Penn State as well, though. 10 wins as Iowa has 2, just demolishing Michigan State on Friday. And again, we've talked a lot about Penn State and what the expectations were for this year and the fact that to a certain extent they haven't been met. But this is still a team that's going to play in the New Year's Six game that is really good. And man, when their defense is good, it is awesome.
Yeah, we've talked about the negative plays and all the pressure that they present. But I just keep thinking about the future when we think about Penn State, because we all know that if there had been a 12-team playoff this whole time, they would have been in it more than anybody else. I mean, they would be the beneficiaries of an expanded field. So 10-2, that would have been good enough to get them in. We would be talking about them so differently in the postseason. And even so, moving forward, the path is going to be very clear. There's a lot of at-large spots. But also, you don't have Michigan and Ohio State every year. The schedule is not going to be easy by any means. But those two and just sort of measuring up against them, recruiting against them, that's going to feel a little different too.
Yeah, it'll be important for them to have an outstanding showing like they had last year in their bowl game, right? Because I think that'll get everybody feeling good once again. Right now, the recency of not being able to take over and beat the big teams that are ahead of them is at the forefront. And I think it'll always be there, but I think this is still a quality football team and an outstanding coach who unfortunately has to go against Ohio State and Michigan, who are both playing at such high level.
And that performance last season really was the kickstart for this season, and why everyone was so high on them and excited because of the performances we saw in the Rose Bowl.
Well, there's a lot to be excited about in this game, including finally some explosion on offense. 4 plays of 40 yards or longer. They had 2 all year coming in. And think about this. James Franklin, that is his 5th 10-win season since 2016. The other coaches who have 5, Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, Dabo Swinney, Brian Kelly.
Pretty good company.
That is some pretty good company to be in. So he's done a tremendous job. Again, they wish there was one more
victory out there
in there somewhere. Michigan State's lousy weekend did end on a positive note. They announced Saturday they hired Oregon State head coach Jonathan Smith to take over their program. He resurrected the Beavers in his 6 seasons in Corvallis. Pac-12 Coach of the Year last year. Got them as high as number 11 in the CFP this year. Took over a 1-win program. He's won 25 games over the last 3 seasons. He will be formally introduced tomorrow. He will be informally introduced to us coming up here in just a few minutes on Big Ten Today. But this just feels like a really good hire.
It's a great fit. And, we've talked a lot about what Michigan State needed as we went through this. And it was, a program builder, someone who could do this and has a plan and is patient, but also someone who's done it in difficult circumstances. And Oregon State's a really hard job. And, he is responsible for some of their biggest success as a player, then as a coach. He understands in-state rivalries and being kind of that second of the two in-state schools. But he's really steady. He's just a normal guy. And I think that's going to be really important for them as they are coming through turbulence and they need some stability. Blue collar, all of that. Like, he just checks all of those boxes.
And I think when you think about Michigan State, listen, it is a blue collar type of a team that needs to have developmental players to be able to make sure you get the right pieces in place to build that program. We've seen it done before, so we know that it can happen again. It'll also be interesting to see how they utilize the transfer portal and what the philosophy will be in that area too, because I think they do need to upgrade the roster quite a bit.
It is interesting, though, that you talk about that the mentality of this program when they've been really good has been blue collar. And I think there is this perception about him because he was the offensive coordinator for Washington under Chris Peterson when they made it to the college football playoff. He's a quarterback, as you said, was on their 2000 team that was maybe the best team that Oregon State's ever had. He's a walk-on quarterback, by the way. So he's a man after your heart there, Howard. But he's had really good defenses. I mean, this year's defense is really solid. Last year they led the Pac-12 in scoring defense, and it's hard to do. I mean, someone has to lead it. But again, it's a really good league in terms of offense. So both sides of the ball, he's done a really nice job there.
And again, you think about the identity of those Michigan State teams under D'Antonio, the really good teams, defense first, blue collar mentality, developing the talent that they recruit. And, you know, he is going to have to make sure he puts people around him who can recruit the Midwest and recruit Ohio. But again, with the track record and how well he has done in challenging situations, you've got to feel great about this if you're a Michigan State
fan. And I think that's the biggest part, right? He's been through those in a challenging spot where it's tough to win. And to be able to put a team and a program together that can go out and compete each and every week is what Michigan State has to have.
Again, looking forward to talking to him coming up in just a few minutes. Indiana's in the market for a new coach as well. Tom Allen dismissed yesterday after the Hoosiers fell to Purdue on Saturday, finishing off a 3-win season. He had some great moments in Bloomington. Finished 12th in the nation in 2020. Was their highest finish in more than half a century. But IU's loss Saturday was its 24th in 27 conference games since then. Last 4 defeats this year, all by single-digit margins. He's a really good man, first of all. He had some tremendous success. You really hate to see this for anyone, but I think especially someone that we've spent a lot of time with. I know you've gotten to know him well. He treated us fabulously in our time there. Again, tons of trust and just really fabulous. So hate to see this, but unfortunately, like, it's a wins and loss business.
It's a hard. Hello, watch, stop talking. But it is a hard job. I mean, it really is. And you know, he was really able to use the transfer portal in different ways to be able to upgrade that roster, which he needed to do. It hurt that he didn't quite get the offensive situation the last couple of years figured out. That was a bit of a problem, going back in defense and making plays there. But he's a guy that I thought really had the trust of the state. The high school coaches really believed in him, and we're starting to send kids there. He was able to get players, but sometimes you weren't able to keep those players because they saw greener pastures elsewhere.
Yeah, and then the offense really, after Keelan DeBoer left, it struggled. And so, you know, it's so much about who you've got and how you hire. And he had some great coordinators, but you have success, you lose them, and then things change. And so I think it just became really challenging. And obviously this year, so many one-possession losses that could have gone either way, and maybe that changes things. But, you know, this is a statement for Indiana, I think, about wanting to compete at the high level, wanting to invest in football at a high level, heading into the new, bigger Big Ten. You know, we'll see what the splash that they're able to make with the next head coach.
This was a significant buyout, and I think that kind of comes along with what you're saying. There was a notion that, well, maybe they'll give him one more year because, man, that's a huge buyout, and so it does send a strong signal that, hey, we're here to compete,
they're serious
and
about this.
we mean business here. What's the right fit? I'm not necessarily asking for names, so if anyone wants to offer some, they could. But what's the right fit here at IU? What's their niche?
Well, I think, you're going to look at people who have ties to the school. Kane Womack is someone who's been there and been part of understanding, what it takes to win. But I think there's other MAC coaches, Jason Candle. Sean Lewis is someone at Colorado who has been a head coach in the MAC as well. So I think there's that type of mold, I think, with people who have experience in the Midwest or the MAC and understand what the jobs that are traditionally towards the bottom of the Big Ten, the challenges that you walk into in those types of jobs. But I think for this, you also need to get the NIL arm built up and make sure that, that is aligned with what you're trying to do from a football standpoint. But I think someone who can recruit Ohio, recruit the Midwest.
You're going to have to be an outstanding recruiter. And I think you're going to have to be able to get along and understand what's going on in the state and trying to really build the program. Because I think one of the challenging parts, right, when you go out and hire a hot shot coach with a hot name, how long can you keep them there? And I think that was one of the things that was so exciting to have a guy like Coach Allen there.
Right,
because
it's such
you
a
knew
history
he was
in the state.
Yeah, and he was going to be a long-time guy. Now your challenge becomes, okay, you better make sure that you have a roster, because if you go and hire the best person for this job, they could also be looking elsewhere.
And I think, again, it's talent identification too, right? You got to find guys that you can develop and maybe are slipping through the cracks elsewhere. You got to be able to maximize.
Right. They've been very portal heavy here in the last couple of years. So it's finding that balancing act, I think, of can you get, hey, they were the first, they got Michael Penix. Now he decommitted from Tennessee, but still, like, they had him in as a freshman, right? So now when you have a player of that caliber, obviously there were injury issues. There was a lot of other stuff going on, but can he stick around and can you turn him to a Heisman candidate at your place rather than somewhere else? Jonathan Smith and his family arrived in East Lansing yesterday, one day after he was named the new head coach at Michigan State. Smith taking over a program that's been through a lot. Mel Tucker dismissed in September, finished off a 4-8 season on Friday, I should say, and now Smith comes in to restore it to its recent heights. He joins us now for our big interview. Coach, really good to have you with us. Congratulations. What appealed to you the most about this job?
Well, there was a lot to like. Put some thought into it as the process went on. I just felt the fit was great in regards to what I value, in regards to this community, this fan base, a program of substance, being a program we're working to develop young men on and off the field. Listening to Alan and his vision for the place was right in line on how I like to do things. And so there's a lot there, this passionate fan base. I think you can win at a high level. There's some serious work to do here, and I'm excited about diving into it.
Well, you were coaching at your alma mater, and that, of course, is a place that means a whole lot to you in Oregon State, going through a lot, conference realignment going on, and they don't really have a place right now. How tough was it to leave Oregon State behind?
Yeah, that place means a ton, no question. These things aren't always easy. I go back to the timing and the fit. I wasn't going to just abandon a place. I wanted to be going to a place, and so I go back to the conversations, learning more and more about Michigan State. This felt like the right timing, the right fit for me.
You took over, I should say, Oregon State in a rough spot. I mean, they were coming off a one-win season. You built it up and got it to the point here where these last few years you've been really competitive. What can you apply from what you did in Corvallis to Michigan State? I realize it's a different situation. Certainly, Michigan State has had higher level success more recently than Oregon State had. But still, what parts of that and having a rebuild there can you apply to Michigan State?
Yeah, there's some similarities, and I'll kind of say it to you the same. I had a team meeting, first one this morning. Awesome to get around those guys and told my story of the coaching career and things and going to different places, not just as the head coach, but also when I was offensive coordinator. And it starts with building some trust. That's not easy to do when it's a brand new setup. Those players don't know me very well at all, vice versa. I didn't get the opportunity to sit in their homes through the recruiting process, get to know them or those close to them and family and things. And so you got to start with building some trust. That takes a little bit, but we're going to dive into that in regards to connection, knowing stories. And that's where we've kind of started. And that was similar when we started at Oregon State, and it worked well.
I know when you got the Oregon State job, Chris Peterson, as one of your mentors, told you you needed to be comfortable being uncomfortable. How does that
Yeah.
apply to the Michigan State job?
Yeah, I think it needs a role of leadership, not just a head football coach. Like when you're on a stage and you're leading a large group, there's some times where it's going to be uncomfortable. And he was really wise with that. I do think the uncomfortableness is that part leads me to know you got to surround yourself with some great people, some great support, which we've been able to do over the last 6 years. That's 100% what we plan to do here. The support here at Michigan State, not just the maybe 10 assistant coaches throughout the athletic department. This community going to need everyone's support and get aligned behind, again, a program that this place takes great pride in. And I feel almost honored to be the head football coach.
Now, Coach, I read a lot of stuff that some of your mentors have talked about, your high school coaches, even guys you played with, who all said you could tell this guy had something, like he had these leadership qualities that you could foresee going into the future would make him a great coach. What are some of those qualities that you think have led you to be successful in this business?
Yeah, well, I've had some great mentors that I could look up to, ask advice, to see their example, like you mentioned. And, Chris Peterson for a while. My first coach in college, my first position coach was Paul Chris. And he exposed me to doing it away offensively in the game, but he was just himself. And he gave me that same advice 6 years ago when I was coming to head coach for the first time, of being myself and authentic to it. And that's what I've tried to be. Nothing outside of who I am, and being honest up front. And it's an approach I take.
Oregon State, of course, has been a developmental program historically. You are maybe one of the great examples of that, a walk-on quarterback who ended up being one of the great players in the history of the program and led them to arguably their greatest heights. Michigan State's had a lot of successes, I'm sure you know, as a developmental program. Mark D'Antonio, that was kind of his equation, was taking 2- and 3-star guys and turning them into a great team and ultimately make it to the college football playoff. We understand now that the world's a little different. You've got the portal too, and there is a chance to go out and build your roster that way. What do you see as the balancing act at Michigan State?
Yeah, there's no question we want to start with development and development in a program, and the ability to develop year after year, especially for a younger player to be in the program. I want him leaving way better as a player, person, student, the whole thing. So we want to be about a development. I want to develop the highest star rated player as well. With 2, 3, 4, 5 star, they come to the place and they develop and improve. The roster, yes, there's different avenues to build a roster. We will use every avenue, but we want to start with a high school player, come in here and develop and get better. That'll be the hope that the core of the roster will be.
What's your message to this group, Coach? I mean, they've been through a lot. You were their third head coach in less than 3 months. You've got to sell a lot of these guys on staying. What are you going to say to them, or what have you already said to them?
Yeah, I talked to them, and it just played out. Like, we played the University of Washington last year, so I was able to see them on tape a little bit. And then as this process goes, I came across a couple of games that it did. Used examples of, I looked at the Rutgers game in the miserable weather, and I told them, yeah, that thing didn't end up the way they wanted, but all they've been through, they are competing and battling. They had a nice come from behind tight game against Indiana, found a way to win. I thought there was a lot of character in the room. With all the uncertainty, unsettling that they'd been through, for them to continue to battle and compete, I thought there's some real character and talent in the room. I'm excited to work with them.
You are in an interesting spot in that you are coming from the Pac-12, and as everyone, I assume, watching this show well knows, we've got 4 teams coming from the Pac-12 to join the Big Ten next year. All of your background as a coach and as a player, and frankly in high school as well, growing up in California, is on the West Coast. In what ways can that be an advantage for you, kind of understanding that group of teams that maybe some teams in the Big Ten don't know that well yet?
Yeah, there's no question that I got familiarity and background with those 4 teams, the West Coast. I will say it this way: I'm excited to get over here in the state of Michigan, learn and grow. I go back to the fit, and even now being here 24 hours, the people fit a lot of what I want to be about: low ego, high output, blue collar, working at it, and I feel confident in that. Those 4 teams joining the league, what I felt, again, was so intriguing for me on this opportunity was this conference is the best in the country. You talk about those 4 additions across the board, and I wanted to be able to have a chance to compete at the highest level.
Last question for you. As you know, been a rough year for Michigan State. They lost to the top 3 teams in the East by combined 129-3 score. It's not what Michigan State fans expect from their program. What is your message to the fan base about getting this back to the spot they expected to be in?
Yeah, I mean, you hired a guy that is really excited and committed to doing this thing. I very confident, compete at the highest level. Michigan State has done it. It's been proven. It's historical on that end. No question, this league is competitive. Those teams are, currently they were, really good this year. Just know that I'm completely committed, excited about the work that it's going to take. Going to surround this building with some great people, men, players of character, but players with some talent, and we're going to go to work.
Jonathan Smith, we will not keep you from doing that. Get to work. We look forward to working with you here, and welcome to the Big Ten. Thanks a lot for taking some time out to talk to us.
Yeah, appreciate it.
It is time to go around the Big Ten. Indiana soccer onto the Elite Eight for the 29th time, extending its own NCAA record. Be number 7 national seed Virginia on the road yesterday to get there. The 200th win of Todd Yeagley's amazing career. They will face Notre Dame Saturday for a spot in the College Cup. 5 Big Ten teams made it to the NCAA volleyball tourney, including 2 of the 4 number 1 seeds, Wisconsin and Nebraska. Purdue, Penn State, Minnesota earning bids as well. All 5 open tourney play either Thursday or Friday, with all but the Gophers playing at home. Big Ten will send 9 teams to bowl games. 8 of them had already wrapped up their spots going into the weekend. 3 teams had a chance to win their way in, Nebraska, Illinois, and Minnesota. They all lost, but the Gophers still get a bowl bid at 5 and 7, as there were not enough 6-win teams to fill the spots. It then goes to the academic progress rate scores, and Minnesota was the best of the 5-win programs. Did not play well against Wisconsin. Turns out it did not matter, though. Let's talk about we got a few more games to get to, and 5 of the 6 teams are heading to bowl games. So let's kind of in that context. Wisconsin, little bit of momentum. What do we think of the Badgers as they head into the postseason?
I thought they closed out the season really well, and I thought especially the way that they ran the ball. You saw how excited Luke Fickell was after the game, that was the identity. This was the way that they won that game, and I think that's something to take away coming out of the regular season and possibly into the postseason.
Yeah, opportunity, again, wants to have more practices, to get that opportunity to have recruits on campus. I think that's one of the big parts of being able to be bowl eligible, to get those extra practices in. And this is a team that's really had a lot of injuries. Maybe they can get some guys healthy again and get them rolling for this bowl game.
Also clinched a winning season with that win, 22nd straight winning season.
Wow.
For Wisconsin, is 10 longer than any other school in the Big Ten. Quick thoughts on Minnesota, kind of backdoor their way in, but you get those extra practices.
You get the extra practice, but make no mistake about it. They're disappointed in the way this season has gone because there were such high expectations for this program. So this just gives them an opportunity to try to turn the corner.
Let's focus on Maryland and Rutgers. Maryland, a record-setting day. I mean, Leah Tagovailoa becomes the all-time passing yardage leader in the Big Ten, if you don't include the bowl games of Drew Brees. That is a remarkable achievement, and it felt like they got a little bit of their mojo back here. The big plays, they really gashed with a pretty good Rutgers defense.
Yeah, I thought that was a really nice win and an encouraging win for them. We saw them get up off the mat after they had a really rough October and early November. And we can kind of set aside that Michigan game because Michigan's one of the best teams in the country. And the 2 wins that they had at the end of the season, really important. And you heard Locks talk about that afterwards, about what it meant for the senior class, Leah, those types of guys to end the season on a high note. That's important for them as they continue to try to build and figure out what their identity is going to be without Talia.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see which way they go from an offensive standpoint. I'm sure they'll be in the portal, but this is a team that has to really focus on a lot of the little things as well, because when they had that stretch when things weren't going well, it was a lot of self-inflicted wounds that really caused a lot of their problems.
disappointing finish for Rutgers. Gave up a bunch of big plays, 4 plays of 40 yards or longer.
Yeah, very unusual. We hadn't seen them do that this season. But that's why it was so important for them to get that 6th win early when they did.
Yeah.
They need to be better in November. Certainly that's something they need to do moving forward. But you're going to get those practices. You're going to get those reps too.
And I think one of the challenges is your team wears down toward the end of the season. And when you don't have that depth as a roster, you're not able to roll as many players through. So as they continue to go through this practice process, they're also able to continue to build that roster.
And Kyle Monungai, still fantastic season.
Yeah.
Amazing. Most rushing yards in the Big Ten.
Yeah, that's remarkable.
It is incredible. Really, really good year. Finally, Northwestern and Illinois, the Wildcats just continue to pen a remarkable tale, Howard.
They've done an unbelievable job, and if it wasn't for what was done at Iowa, I mean, you'd have a lot to say about what Coach Braun has done and what this team has done, and you just expect them to continue to get better. And now it's about them being able to go out and put that recruiting philosophy together and continue to build their roster as well.
I still think it's going to be David Braun for Coach of the Year. I know we're into that season. It could go either way, but
it really could.
7 wins with a roster that had 1 win with all the turmoil. I think he'd be my vote.
Yeah, and I don't know that you would have thought the team would have won 7 games with the roster that they had.
No way.
Oh.
Yeah,
no.
I would have never thought they'd.
They had injuries too.
Yeah, no, it's pretty crazy. Like, think about this: they beat 4 West teams this year. Those 4 West teams, they had gone 0-8 against over the last 2 seasons, losing those 8 games by a combined 215 points. And they beat all 4 of those teams.
So we all definitely saw this coming. Absolutely.
Big Ten Players of the Week, Talia Tagovailoa. We talked about his record-setting career. He gets the nod after a huge game against Rutgers. Aaron Casey continues to excel, gets Defensive Player of the Week despite the loss to Purdue. James Turner of Michigan winning special teams, their fine kicker, and Dylan Thieneman. How about 5 times this year he's been named Big Ten Freshman of the Week? Let's get to the helmet stickers. Howard, why don't you lead us off?
Well, let's go to Iowa and Meter. I mean, he comes down, hasn't had opportunity in game to be able to do this, and kicks the game winner, which was huge for them. But I was down there yesterday, and they all believed that he would be able to make the kick, and he just was in a groove and was able to do that. Allen, I'm excited to see Allen back rushing and putting up those big numbers, 165, and then Coach Moore and the job that he was able to do through this stretch of 3 games. Really an outstanding job.
I always like when we kind of tweak the rules a little bit, so you
right?
give it to a head coach for this one. So mine are all going to players, though,
okay.
But I will start with the Michigan game, and I will say Blake Corum. Now we've seen him score a lot of touchdowns from within the 5, right? Yeah. But he had a couple big plays in this game, and none bigger than the touchdown right after Zach Zinter's injury. Dylan Thieneman, you mentioned he is basically the freshman of the year already. I know we'll get the formal awards at some point, but 6th and 7th interceptions of the season. One of the nation's best freshmen. He'll be on all the freshman All-America lists, absolutely. And then Leah, kind of a career helmet sticker, right? But becoming the leader in passing yardage for the Big Ten, but also great finish for Maryland, great finish for him as well.
Some pretty good quarterbacks in this conference historically. Yeah. So if you're at the very top of the list, that is nothing to sneeze at.
Opportunities.
We're going to get some thoughts on the champ game before we go. It's presented by Discover, Saturday night in Indy. Michigan's been to 3 straight. Iowa 2 of the last 3. They lost to the Wolverines 42-3 when they played for the title in 2021. Jim Harbaugh addressed the media a short time ago, still basking in the glow of Saturday's win.
The coaches, the staff, especially Coach Jerome Moore, called a great game, coached the offensive line, and made the decisions as the head coach. And I'm not saying that I'm in a position of granting who a Michigan man is or who isn't, or who a Michigan legend is or is not the maker of those 2 lists. But I have nominated people before, and I nominate Sharon Moore as a Michigan legend.
I think it's fair to say he'll get some seconds
No doubt.
on the nomination. Let's dive into this game. There are not many people giving Iowa a chance in it. what would it take here for the Hawkeyes to make this competitive and maybe pull the upset?
Well, I think no turnovers on the offensive side and be able to come up with some explosive plays, really be able to run the football, which we've seen them do. But this is a stout defense that they'll be playing against. But I think they'll have to play that perfect game on the offensive side and not make mistakes.
And the run game is important, too, because you need to possess the ball. You can't just let Michigan dictate that and keep their offense on the field. I think that's part of it, probably defensive points, the field position game, all of the things that makes Iowa, puts them in position to win games all the time in a couple big offensive plays. But it's going to be a struggle against this Michigan D.
That's the problem. It's just so hard to do it against Michigan, right? You're talking about the top scoring defense in the country. And then, as you said, can they score on defense? But Michigan just doesn't turn it over. I mean, it's not a team that it feels like there's a clear path to beat, but this is why we play the games. We'll be talking about it all week. We will see you tomorrow. All conference defense announced. Dave Wanstead with me as well.